Welcome to this webinar on scaling your D2C brand and hearing from expert insights, and particularly on how to go global, why, when, and how. So today it's my privilege to moderate this panel, and I'll quickly introduce the four experts that we have with us today, starting with Mr. Kanwaljit Singh. Kanwal is the founder and managing partner at Fireside Ventures, and Kanwal has had a long and successful career in this industry, almost 17 years of investing, and prior to that 13 years working at Unilever and Pepsi. So it's an absolute privilege to have you with us today, Kanwal. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we have two wonderful entrepreneurs, starting with Bala Sarda, who's in a very short span of time has built, I think maybe 5-6 years, has built a global brand with Vadam Teas. So welcome Bala. It's great to have you, and looking forward to hearing your insights and how you've taken your brand global.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Great. Next, we have Ahana Gautam, who is the founder of Open Secret, and she and her brand have created a very exciting kind of in a large snacking market on how to kind of unjunk family snacking. And so it's great to have Ahana. Ahana also, prior to Open Secret, spent time at some of the global FMCG majors like P&G. Ahana, thank you so much for your time as well.
Thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Great. And our fourth expert for today is Biswajita Mishra. She actually heads the account management function for the global selling program in India, and has been instrumental in kind of building that to over $1 billion business. In fact, I think it's now a $3 billion business and growing very fast, which is part of the global selling program. And prior to that, Biswajita also comes with 7 years of experience working at the global FMCG majors. So welcome, Biswajita.
Thank you, Dave.
Awesome. So thank you so much, everybody. Hopefully you all can all hear us. So just to kick off today's session, Kanwal, if I'd like to start with you, just to kind of set the stage, if you can kind of tell us, given your experience, investing for many years in consumer brands, can you tell us some of the key reasons why we are seeing increased investor interest in funding consumer brands, and also kind of help us define what is the meaning of direct to consumer or D2C or a digital first brand? That will be really helpful.
Honestly, the investor interest is always a follower of entrepreneurial activity. So I would certainly say that the early trends, and you have two great entrepreneurs here who can talk about their experience, but the opportunity for building digital first brands, and I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by different terminology, is really something that has emerged over the last decade. Certainly in the last 5-6 years, it's accelerated significantly. And what caused that phenomena was really a combination of 2 or 3 very interesting factors. Obviously, there has been a huge surge in demand for these new age millennial brands, powered by the large millennial population in India, very digitally savvy, aware of what's happening globally. So, they are missing these, exciting new brands, which unfortunately didn't exist. And the fact that they didn't exist was because it was very complex to build brands in India, especially in the traditional distribution. We talked about Procter, we talked about Unilever. So we have a lot of FMCG representation here, and we all know how difficult it is to build a brand in the Indian context, where distribution, mass advertising, etc., is highly complex. So the evolution and the growth of the digital ecosystem, and what I mean by that is a combination of the media choices through Facebook, Google, YouTube, Instagram, etc., and the digital channels for distribution. Again, Biswajita is here from Amazon, so are you. All of that converged into one very interesting, ecosystem play, which encouraged a lot of entrepreneurs to start thinking about how to resolve problems. And interestingly, I'm sure Ahana and Bala will share their stories, but a lot of entrepreneurs took personal experiences, personal shortcomings of what they felt in the market, and started creating brands. Investors saw that as an emerging opportunity. People like us who do early stage, we came in a little earlier, and now it's become a much bigger thing. So I think it's a very positive flywheel or a spiral that is starting to happen. And as companies grow, as companies become much larger, the interest in the space grows more, investment comes in faster, the ecosystem matures. We were doing some interesting analysis of the 65, 70 odd unicorns which have got created. About 65% of them are in this space of what we call enablers for D2C brand, payment systems, warehousing, logistics, e-marketplaces, etc. So it's really a very unique time and place, I would say, as a country like India with over 1 billion consuming population, to have everything converge and create this opportunity. And just a one-liner on your second question, we believe digital first brands is really the catch-all. It's really about understanding how do you communicate, engage, build a relationship with the consumer, how do you manage the distribution, which can allow you a lot of headroom as well as a lot of capability because of the digital channels. So your DNA as a business, and again, I would love to hear Anna and Bala's views on what the DNA really means, is how do you build digital first brand? Then whether you sell it on a marketplace like Amazon, or whether you sell it on your own website, or you take it to an offline channel, and now you have all these quick commerce options with Swiggy and all that. I think it's becoming more and more of a very interesting milieu in which these brands are getting built. So very exciting times. I think we are just starting to see the process.
Interesting trends there. You're talking about the millennial customer, how it's kind of been harder to distribute, and also kind of maybe the DNA that it takes. So I think as that as a background, maybe I'll request Bala. Bala, you've, as I said in the introduction, you've built a global brand, which is in over 130 countries. So it'll be great if you can tell us a little bit about your story, Bala. Talk about the brand, the story, as also when did you actually decide to go global, and what are some of the thought process and framework that you may have used as you thought about this?
No, absolutely, Dev. I think, a little bit about myself, I don't know, a lot of people know this, but personally, I come with a lineage of over 85 years in the tea industry, right? And even though I've grown up seeing tea, and, most of my early holidays have been at tea estates, I honestly never thought I will join this business or do anything in this, because from the outside, like so many categories from India getting exported out to the world, it looked very boring, commoditized, no value addition happening. And I think it's only, only after my undergrad, and I always had that entrepreneurial bug. So I did a couple of student startups in my undergrad, and one of them was a digital marketing company. And it's only after my undergrad, when I was looking at a real business to start, is when I ended up researching, multiple categories, and one of them was, of course, tea, given my background in this industry. And that's when we realized three, four very simple things which made us do what we are doing for the last 6.5 years. One, I'll quickly share that with you. One, of course, as we know, India is this magical land of ingredients, like I always call it, right? Tea is one of the healthiest beverages you can consume. India grows 25-30% of the world's tea production. You look at products like spices, 80% of the world's turmeric is made in India, and the list goes on and on and on, right? And in the tea category, we of course saw that, while we were growing all these teas, all the product was getting exported at single-digit margins to foreign brands across the world who would, put a London or a Paris, no offense there, but on their logos, package it aesthetically, and of course sell it at multiple X margins, right? So we said, why can't we change that? That was number one. Number two, I think, the categories we were playing in, or were looking at, we genuinely believe that there's an opportunity to make available an exceptional quality product, which is, like the base of anything you do as a consumer entrepreneur, right? I think having a phenomenal product is by default, right? You can't, in any case, do anything without that. And we said, unlike fine wine or liquor, products like tea are better when they're more fresh, right? So why are we following this insanely long supply chain, right, from a farmer in Darjeeling to a customer sitting, say, in New York, London, or Tokyo for that matter, right? So, and then we said, with digital coming in, right, with the internet infrastructure, coming in, we thought it is possible to change that. Just imagine, if I would have started Vadam, say, 15 years back, the only way you could have done it was to, go to the US. And if you wanted to do a global market, of course, you had to, go down, set up shop, launch a few products, fail, or you would have gotten to get some customer insights months and months after launching the products, right? And of course, that entails a huge amount of money you need to invest upfront, right? With internet, we saw an opportunity to change all of that, cut out all middlemen, take farm fresh teas from India to consumers in markets like the US, Europe, and of course, start small, test quite a bit, and then of course, pick your winners and scale it up, right? So that was how we were thinking. Lastly, on the brand side, I think ultimately we are building a consumer brand. So after all that we do, it's the brand a customer is buying into, and that's what you're really building for the long term. We genuinely thought that we have a ticket to win, right? Nobody wants to, buy wine from Singapore and, chocolates from Africa, right? I mean, or any of that, any of those categories for that matter, right? And for some reason we saw, Twinings of London selling more Darjeeling tea, a Starbucks from America selling more chai tea than any Indian brand, right? So we said there is definitely a ticket to win for us as a brand because, there is always a high trust with origin products, right? There's always that high trust with products coming from source amongst consumers. And, I remember walking into a Whole Foods aisle 8 years back, and the entire narrative, and this is the last part of why we started, the entire narrative was about fair trade and ethical trade and direct trade. I spoke to a few consumers and realized that in markets like these, consumers were genuinely looking to pay a premium for brands which give back and are sustainable. And here we were thinking that, tea is one of the largest employers of labor in India. It's struggling. And the big reason is there's no value addition at source, right? So I think these were 3-4 reasons why we decided that there is probably an opportunity to do something in this space. And that's what we did, right? Started in 2015. To come to your question regarding why did we choose going global, I think it was very simple. When we looked at the market, I think the depth of the market in the categories we were in was much, much, much more in markets like America, Europe. I think India, the kind of teas we consume are very different. So for us, it was a very, very simple decision. Of course, there were a bunch of challenges, but I think the decision to go global was very simple. And on your last point, I think, when we were looking at choosing markets, I think we started off with America. I think that is based on a bunch of things, right? I think America overall, just the size of the consumer economy, the disposable income, their openness to trying new products, innovation, and most importantly, the digital infrastructure in America was one of the reasons we said, I think America could be one of the countries we start with. And, that's how we started, of course, selling both on Amazon from almost day one, and of course, our own website.
Got it. Great. Thank you so much, Bala, I think, to share those insights. And I think later on, we'll come back to you to understand a little bit more about, how you, and some of the pitfalls as you kind of grew and as you kind of picked off US as your first market. So thank you so much for that. Maybe coming next to Ahana. Ahana, we were just chatting prior that your brand Open Secret has also made its way into my home, and it's now kind of a secret that moms are keeping and trying to make snacking more healthier. So it'll be great to hear your story, Ahana, and also how you're looking to kind of scale your business, be it kind of within cities here in India or globally.
Absolutely. Firstly, Dev, thank you so much for making your secret an open secret. So let me start by saying that. So I would say, Dev, we are a bunch of purpose-driven folks. So whenever we do something, we always ask this question, why? So let me first answer why I started Open Secret, right? And it goes back to my childhood. I think Kawal also hinted that every founder would have some personal experience, and I would completely agree with that. I grew up in a small city in Rajasthan called Bharatpur. I don't know how many of you have heard about the city. Was raised by a single mother. She was a working mother, and she single-handedly raised me and my brother in that small city. And I remember, coming back from school, I would eat all the junk food which was available in the house. I was a very, very overweight kid, and I'm not kidding when I say I was really like 3x my current size. So I think that was an experience which I would say the weight and the experience continued with me, and it definitely had a big impact on how now I think about food, because at that time, to be very honest, did not have the exposure or the understanding that food plays such an integral role in your health and wellness journey. Fast forward, I was studying at Harvard Business School, and as Bala was also mentioning, like your visit to Whole Foods, your visit to Trader Joe's, you see a completely different market. You see aisles which are filled with like healthy, tasty, convenient snacks for the entire family. So this opened my eye. And at the same time, my sister-in-law back in India, she was questioning the same thing, that she was looking for a snack for my niece and she wasn't able to find a single brand. And that made me wonder that, we are talking so much progress in India, but why is it that this age-old problem has transcended generation? Like my mother struggled with it, but how come an Indian family is not able to find a tasty, a healthy, and a convenient snacking option? And that's how I started learning more about this space. It's a $12 billion category. It's growing at double digit. And it was bizarre to me that in our houses, we have high-speed internet, but look at the snacks that the kids are eating. And the question I ask myself is, why do Indian families have to eat junk, right? There has to be a better option. And that's the reason why, I worked in food with General Mills, because I wanted to get the consumer first experience, but that's how it became our purpose. And we really want to make every Indian family snack better. And if you think about the entire landscape, right, these categories, if I just take an example of like, let's say cookie or biscuit, again, as I was thinking about this entire landscape, and if I just take one category, whether let's say biscuit or cookies, three big companies, they have more than 70% market share. And how much innovation have they done? Absolutely, like 0 to none. And also going back to Kawal's point that, the families were demanding better for you products, but there were absolutely none. So if I have to define India right now, it's a hugely supply constrained market. I think the demand is infinite, but the supply is very, very limited. And that's what we want to solve. We want to become that one-stop solution for your unjunk snacks. And, second question that people also ask me is, why this name Open Secret? I truly believe that, every brand has a purpose. I think our purpose is very, very clear, that we want to make every Indian family snack better. But every brand is also based on core belief systems, right? One, and I think our most important belief system is that we believe mothers know the best. And I think that also differentiates who we are. There are a lot of new age brands, and I'm not saying like, there's a lot of communication which is happening where people would tell the consumers, let me tell you what you should be eating. Let me tell you what you should be doing, right? We don't want that. We truly believe that there is absolutely no one who knows what is better for the family other than the mother. And we want to keep the mother on the pedestal. I was having a conversation with somebody like a couple of days back, and he asked me this question, oh, by the way, who leads innovation? Like, who's the innovation officer at Open Secret? And I said, it's the mother. Like the mothers are the chief product officers at Open Secret. And this reflects even in the name. We initially, a lot of people told me that, you should attack the guilt of the mother, like, make her guilty. How dare you give this maida cookie to your child? And I said, that's not what we want to do. If we really want to empower mothers, it should reflect in every decision making. So whether it's the name of the brand, whether it's the narrative of the brand that, you know the best, we just want to be an enabler on this journey so that you can give what you want to give. The third thing I would say, it also reflects in the way we are manufacturing our products. All our products are manufactured in-house, and we have employed women from local communities and mothers from local communities, and they make these products for other mothers. And I would say, like, going as an extension, I think, for us, it's all about being there for the mothers in true sense. So this is Open Secret, and what we really want to build, Dave, is we truly want to ensure that earlier tension which used to exist, what mothers want their families to eat and what families want to eat, were mutually exclusive, and we want that tension to go away. And my biggest learning on this journey has been that, a lot of people told me that this health and wellness and new age G2C brands are like a metro phenomena. But let me tell you one thing. a mother in Bharatpur, where I grew up, resonates with the problem that I'm sharing. And in fact, I'll give you an example on Amazon. More than 60% of our revenue comes from outside top cities. So what we are building here, which is, access to healthy, tasty, and convenient snacking, it's not only just for Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, but it's actually building for Bharat as well as for India. And that's the whole goal. Now, coming back to your question about, the journey and how we're building it, as I said, mother is a North Star. When we started cookies, she told us what is the junk, so we removed it. Then she told us what we want to innovate. Every single innovation has come from the mother, and where the market as well. Again, it's a very pull-based thing, Dave. When we started seeing, and I think that's the benefit of online channel as well. Kanwal mentioned about lower barrier, that you don't need to have a very large army of sales force. But what online also gives you a lot of data. And if I have to tell what is marketing today, marketing is data. And that's the power and that's the benefit. And as I was looking at this data, I saw, okay, mothers are ordering from, let's say, Ahmedabad, from Baroda, from Rajkot. And that's what we did. Now, even in our offline distribution, we are just following the online data. So going global is also a very pull-driven strategy. Wherever we hear customers asking for our products, we will just follow them and we will just go there. So whether it's expansion within India, whether it's expansion outside India, it's all about following the customer. And it was very surprising, to be very honest, when I heard people were asking for our products in USA, because I thought, okay, USA, there are a bunch of products, but I guess it's a universal problem that a mother wants the family to eat better. And that's what we are doing here at Open Secret.
Got it. No, thank you so much for sharing that, inspiring story, Ahana. It's like, to hear how you've kind of got here. And also, so it looks like from a scaling standpoint, you're literally, since you're saying it's supply constraint and the demand is there very much within India, your focus is really looking at where it's getting sold. Looks like tier 2, tier 3 is where you're kind of looking to expand into, rather than going global at this point.
Both. I think as a founder's journey, it's just, it's not, sometimes it's not either or, sometimes it's and. So it's both expanding in India. But as I said, we are hearing, especially from UAE, there is a lot of demand that we are getting. So UAE and USA are our two focus markets where we should be live, again, thanks to Amazon, starting next month.
Awesome. Great. So I think that's a great segue to bring in Biswajita next. Biswajita, you lead the Amazon Global Selling Program. So it'll be wonderful to hear as to how Amazon can help a growing D2C brand and some of the ways you're doing that today.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. So we have multiple brands who are super successful on the platform. So last year we ended with 70,000 sellers on our platform, and multiple of them in greater than 10 million kind of bracket GMS that they're doing. So coming to what are the critical areas and how global selling as a program is helping startups in going global. Firstly, I would say we provide the brands the opportunity and the access of 300 millions of prime customers across 200 countries. So the opportunity is huge. And now, before we look at how we enable the brands, I would first talk about what barriers the brands face when they're starting to go global. So firstly, how do the brands know what products to sell? And that is the primary thing that we really help with our ML customer insights. And we provide product and customer insights by marketplace, basically what sells, what works, what's the category penetration, what's the right product, the selection, the pricing. And for this, we have a dedicated brands team to help the D2C brands formulate their export strategy, including compliance, processes, scaling up levers, and like basically giving them access to the geography and category experts and to understand the entire product market fit, and so that they can really become successful and focus on the product to grow. And here I would also like to add that the most successful brands do it really well. So the product market fit is of primary importance. And once with all our insights, say they launch the product, then they have reviews, customers start sending reviews, what they like about the product, what they dislike. And a lot of brands, the successful brands that I said, they do a very good job of looking at the reviews and keep on innovating, being customer focused and driving innovation. So both of it really leads to a great product, and that's how overall as a team we help them achieve that product market fit. Secondly, the other important question that brands face is what are the important levers, or how do they invest in marketing or target their segment customers to grow? So we enable the advertisement and marketing ecosystem for them, which is very fast and has both self-serving tools like sponsored ads, products, brands, and managed services like ad optimization, wherein we really help you grow on your, get the best ROI on your ad spends. And there is a demand side platform as well to ensure brands can access the right set of their TG, the target audience that they want. We also work with teams to give them access to all peak events globally. So there is Black Friday, Cyber Monday, which is going to come up in US, Thanksgiving, Halloween, and multiple other events in US, or if you look at Middle East, Ramzan, Eid, and whole host of such peak events, which actually accelerate the sales across the globe. So that's what we give access to, and our teams really help the brands navigate the process, configure the right deal so that they can maximize the sales during those events. And the third and the most important one is figuring it out, the entire cross-border fulfillment. Now that's going to be a slightly complicated process for exports, given that the higher lead time to service your customers. And hence it's important that, so actually as Amazon, what we do is we have partnered with the Partner Carrier Program, and they provide the hassle-free fulfillment and logistics solutions end-to-end. So right from starting from taking your products from India to inbounding it in the US or UAE or UK, the multiple global marketplaces, providing a smooth inbound is something that these partner carriers provide at a much negotiated and affordable rates. And then coming to the fourth point, there are multiple other issues that brands face or they have questions on, like how can they become legally compliant in a destination marketplace, in each of these marketplaces who have different regulations and different compliance requirements across. So how do we get, another question is, how do we get our payment in INR? Like your products are selling in dollars in US, the customers are paying in dollars. Sitting in India, how do you get it in INR? How do we translate all of our listings to the local language? Say you're selling in Germany, the listings have to be in German, or say you are selling in UAE, the entire listing, cataloging, everything needs to be in Arabic. So how do we do that? That is the power that we have is through the powerful service provider network that we have. We have around 500 partners and more, and who provide end-to-end all kinds of services, starting from listing, imaging, and localization, the translation support, or when we talk about the cross-border payments, ensuring that you get your payment in INR sitting here. So we have service providers to really take care of everything, so that you guys can, and the brands can focus on primarily getting the product right, which is the most important thing. And if I have to elaborate a little bit on how we are helping the D2C brands, I'm sure a lot of them are eager to listen to this. In the beginning of this year, so all this that I talked about is primarily how we almost help all the brands, but primarily for D2C brands, this year, earlier in the beginning of this year, we launched a Propel Accelerator program, wherein we, to help all the early stage startups with who are looking for the right investment, mentorship, tech enablement. So we launched this Propel Accelerator in partnership with Fireside Ventures, Sequoia, and Startup India. we partnered with AWS team, so Dave's team. So basically to really educate our sellers or our startups on the entire tech enablement process across supply chain, marketing, order generation, ERP, etc. And that's something that that's the next leg of work that we are really doing to enable the D2C brands so that they can really have all the kind of help that is required, as I said, to rightly focus on the product and get that thing right.
Awesome. No, thank you so much, Viswajita. I think Kanwal also made a point as to how I think this is the right time for someone to start because all the enablers are there. We talked about how a lot of the unicorns today are pretty much enabling this ecosystem. And I think Amazon looks like we're pretty much helping all the way from getting the right product market fit, which are the right categories to get into, I think customer reviews and fulfillment. So thank you so much for sharing that. And like you said, I think at AWS as well, we're trying to do a better job for this segment. We are seeing, the tech-enabled folks who kind of starting their websites on WooCommerce, Magento. We have kind of built templates to kind of get up and running in a few hours. Of course, Shopify is an interesting way that they kind of get started, but then quickly kind of get to their own tech because they have interesting, unique requirements, right, to kind of integrate their marketing and integrate across multiple channels. So I think, and we have a program called Activate, and similarly where we have partnered with the investor ecosystem. So we, I think, jointly are trying to enable the brand. So thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe coming back to Kanwal, Kanwal, if you can share your, since you've been working with probably several brands, Vala, of course, is Vadam is one example where you're an investor at, and I'm sure several other successful investments who've gone global, Mamaearth, Boat. So can you tell us, and maybe advice for people who are listening in today, how should they be thinking about a framework, or how should they be thinking about the key things before they test waters globally?
Sure. So I think a few learnings along the way, and again, love to hear Hannah and Bala's stories around how they are getting the narrative right. So one is, at least my personal belief has always been that there is something which is unique about India, and something which you can offer to the world is a great point of start. We have seen yoga, of course, is now a very, very large and well-established Indian, kind of gift to the world. We have seen Ayurveda, we have seen spices, we have seen tea, getting into more handicrafts and products like that. So there is one, I would say, segment or opportunity where you're taking something which is known to be Indian, the origin story, as Bala called it, and you can build an interesting, business out of it, because globally it's well recognized. Second is if you are changing or disrupting some form of consumption. And I think what Hannah mentioned for her business, we have a company called Slurp Farm, which is using millets, again, trying to create healthy eating in a slightly broader category. Where once again, it could well be that there is something which you are offering which is not in the market, and you can disrupt the market. We have seen toys coming out of India. We have seen some very interesting categories in jewelry, handicrafts. So what can you disrupt in the global market? So that is I would say the more macro view. What probably is very critical is then to define which is the target market you want to go to. Amazon will open up 300 million Prime users for you across 200 countries, but that's obviously not the way you want to start. And once again, learnings with people at Amazon, your own insights, choosing the right market, choosing the right demand for where you believe your product can succeed. Because this is not just placing a product and then hoping it sells, right? I mean, it's a full-blown, more complex exercise because you're not even physically in that location. So I would say that's the other thing. Again, Hannah mentioned UAE, Bala started with America. We have various different models of what can work and how it works. And then the choice of the channel, the choice of the playbook that you want to follow. Most companies, I would say, are following the Amazon, playbook, where they would say we will start with a marketplace, we will get the learning, get the reviews, get the rating. Then, of course, Ita and her team are enabling it. But we also have examples of, say, a company like Ayurveda Experience who chose to go entirely, D2C, which is on their own website. And there are some good reasons for that, and they have been very successful at that. So I would say the next big building block is, what is your channel choice? And today, digital, of course, is the most logical one. But once you get into different geographies, different countries, and language comes in, regulatory stuff comes in. So it's a very complex navigation which one needs to be prepared for. But on the other hand, it's a no-brainer for brands which appeal to that particular consumer audience, because the margin realization is better, the price realization is better. You're building a global presence, and in a context of a global brand, obviously, there is a far larger opportunity in terms of the size and the scope of the business you can build. So it's a step-by-step navigation is how I would put it. But to be honest, I am very excited. I wouldn't be surprised, and I've said it in other forums before, if we start seeing some really large, multi-billion-dollar brands coming out of India. And if ever there was a time for it, I think it's now.
Wonderful. No, I think those are very well put. Not just the origin story and someone who's creating a differentiation in a large category, but looks like you can literally look at any category today and choose the right channel to go global. So that's and I think also coming off my background is more from the SaaS world, and of course we have the Freshworks story which has just gone IPO, and thousands of others. I think unlike the SaaS where there is, generally when we talk to founders, they say that once they reach like a $0.5 million ARR, you do need to pivot very quickly once you've got that product market fit and go global. Unlike in that world here, you have very large markets within India itself. And now that companies have already done it here, we'll certainly go and create iconic global brands as well. So very interesting to hear that. Maybe just like to bring in Biswajita as well to hear her perspective on like you've probably seen a lot of successful brands that you've taken, like you said, 70,000 of them as part of Amazon. Are there brands that are not yet who are probably not yet ready for going global? Any examples that you should share there as advice for someone who's thinking about it?
So if I understand right your question, Dave, so you want to understand like basically if they want to go global where the brands are not yet global, so what's the framework?
Yeah, what are the minimum criteria that you think a brand should have before they should be looking at working with going global?
See, the first point here I would like to say, Dave, is that the global markets present a huge opportunity for all brands. Now, just for example, the US market alone, size-wise, is almost 20 times the market size that we have in Amazon India. So with digitization leading the new normal, that has been a growing interest in e-commerce exports amongst all brands. We have seen now that, as Kamal earlier pointed out, that e-commerce eradicates those redundant procedures and creates a level playing field for any kind of brand to test the waters, identify how products fit into the needs of the customers in other cultures, and they can run all these experiments directly with customers in small quantities and lower upfront investments, and can establish that business market fit, product market fit, stress test all important operational aspects as well, buying, shipping, handling of returns, and all those things. So I would definitely say that time to go global is now. In the last 15 to 18 months during the pandemic, we have realized that a lot of brands and a lot of customers are actually moving online and e-commerce to e-commerce, and hence we also see a lot of our Indian exporters, thousands of Indian exporters are on our global selling program. They have seen an increase in demand for their unique offerings from customers across the world during the initial months of the pandemic itself. So we have been observing a greater demand from global customers in product categories, like Ahana pointed out, something like health, wellness, immunity boosting supplements, sanitizers, toys, all these categories, we see an increased demand. Having said that, the framework to go global is fairly simple. So once you have a product and you understand the product, the customer preferences of the global marketplace, it's very important to get the product right. in the first place. So we emphasize a lot on the right selection for the customer, which means you have to have that kind of ability to really get the right product, understanding the customer demands of that marketplace, have a great listing, localize the entire thing based on the customer demands so that customers can discover your products, and that will lead to a great experience for customers, and that will hence increase your conversion. So for example, understanding, I mean, these nuances are quite different in different categories, and understanding this is critical. So I'll give you an example. Say in bedding, in bed sheets in US, what sells is solid colors and like higher thread counts, 800, 1000 TCs. Whereas if you look at Middle East or UAE market, what sells is all these colorful, I mean, printed bed sheets pretty much, and the lower thread counts, pretty much like what we see in India. So understanding where your product lies and where your strength lies, and if you can innovate for the customer preferences in the destination marketplace, that's the first thing, having the right product. The second thing is, and the most important thing is, as Kamal also mentioned, understanding the market. And though we give you access to so many countries, but understanding your strength and whether you understand the market really well. So every geography is unique and has its own nuances. So it's imperative for a brand to define the key target market and focus on it for first couple of months or quarters to really nail that marketplace and before expanding into other marketplaces. So nailing that marketplace, which means identifying the right customer, identifying your channel, like what fulfillment channel you want to get into, whether it's fulfillment by Amazon or your own fulfillment network that you want to have, and understanding the compliance requirements that can vary different from market to market. So for example, like Europe and Middle East have additional requirements of VAT before you get started. So understanding that and being compliant in the marketplace is also critical. Third is the pricing bit, which is actually quite a key element. So understanding our endeavor is always to position, I mean, brands' endeavors is always to position their products competitively. What's important is to define your USP, understand how the best sellers in that marketplace are priced, and decide how you want to play it, whether it's the premium segment, the mass prestige segment, where you really want to play. And the best part is the global marketplace actually gives you a leeway to choose your pricing and play around with your margins. Definitely on the next bit is primarily around how do you invest in the right levers so that you can grow your brand. So choose the right levers and promotion aspect that really works for you. So if it's a newly launched brand you're planning to launch, then definitely you should invest in sponsored ads, sponsored products to initially build awareness and increase your sales ranking. And once your brand matures, you can really look at the other upper funnel levers like sponsored videos, managed services like your demand side platform, and those become key to increasing your market share. And say you're increasing and you're new to the market segment, and you want to really increase your new customer acquisition, go for deals, deal of the day. These are good properties, 7-day deals. And whereas you really want to give some benefit to your repeat customers and you really want to target them, you go with subscribe and save and multiple other such levers which is present on Amazon. Lastly, I would say that brands need to ensure that they have a dedicated team managing their global marketplaces. So once you're ready and you know that you have the ability to scale your teams, so look for somebody who can really, like in your own teams, have a dedicated team who can work on the market nuances, as I said, on the customer preferences, compliances, optimization, because you need that operational focus. The inventory management, all of these things are slightly more complicated and needs to be treated differently versus how you treat it for your local markets. So I would say that would be a key thing as well, dedicated resource and having an agile team to explore the fullest potential of exports.
Got it. No, thank you so much, Vishwajita. I think those are some great practical tips on what are the things a brand would need to do to get started. So thank you so much there. I'd like to bring in Bala again now and hear from him on some of the pitfalls from your journey of going global that that we can learn from.
Sorry, got it. So I think they've some of the challenges we faced early on. One, I think, and I agree to everything which Biswajita mentioned, right? I think first and foremost, making a product which is at par global standards, right? I think that was one of the most critical things we did in the first 2-3 years of our journey. That's all we were doing, right? Everything we sell at Vahdam is made by us in our own facility here. And to make a product in India and take it to markets like the US and Europe, you need to be absolutely sure of product quality, standards, and, bunch of regulations which come with exporting a product in this category, right? Food overall, right? So that was, I think, that was very, very critical from a product perspective. And first the first 3 years for us was all about getting our processes right. We have built a bunch of quality processes as a company, right, which are not needed, but right from when we source the teas in the gardens, to getting it to our facility, and how we keep the teas, and how we take care of the product, how we package it, right? Everything, like those small things adds up to what we ultimately do, right? So that would be number one. And figuring that out, tends to be critical in your success long term. So that's number one. Number two, I think, as a brand, building trust, being an Indian brand was also something we really faced as a challenge early on, right? I think it's thanks to all these amazing entrepreneurs building amazing companies out of India. I think it's changing now drastically, but I think in 2015, that was actually a challenge. I tell this story to a lot of folks, but I remember talking to somebody very senior in marketing, and when I was trying to position the brand, this is in 2014 end, and that person told me that you should not put India in your logo, because that will take away that will take away the trust. And I said, I mean, how can I not do that? We are building an Indian brand. So from there to where we are today, I think it's been a big journey. And how do you solve for it is very simple, right? I think it's by consistently making high quality products, keeping your promise as a brand, over delivering as a brand, and doing it every day, for years and decades. Right? I mean, if you look at any country for that matter, how have they built trust in the consumer segment, right? From Japan and say Switzerland, anything which comes out of that country, is absolutely amazing, and it's the same quality every day. So I think, and that's why interacting with a lot of entrepreneurs, I believe our time has come, because we see that change happening already, and I think in the next 10 years, I think it will transform India into this country which is phenomenally trusted across categories globally, right? So that would be number two. And apart from that, I think operationally, I think Ahana will understand this more than anybody here, but I think operationally, of course, when you take a food product to a foreign market, bunch of challenges, we are governed by the FDA. There is, we pay taxes in 45 states in America, 10 countries in Europe. Everywhere we launch, there is obviously, because we're thinking long term, so everything we do needs to be done the right way. So I think bunch of challenges. And again, I think today what Amazon Global Selling, what the ecosystem, in fact, Fireside does a bunch of things for companies. I think the ecosystem today is so much better. So it's relatively easier. I think in the early days, it was still tougher to, figure out all of this on your own, right? So that would be my number 3 point. And I think lastly, I think when you build a global business, how do you stay relevant as a brand? In a foreign land? I think that again is an ongoing challenge, is something we have at least identified, because no matter what you do, what you say, you might have studied in America or some country you're working, but how an American understands the culture of America, only they understand it. So you are always at a disadvantage when you get into a market like that, or for any market for that matter, right? So I think just knowing the pulse of that market, keeping yourself updated, and these are markets which are evolving much faster than some of these other markets, including India, right? So just keeping your brand on trend, innovation, is an important thing you need to do, right from product, processes, how you market your brand. So I think that for me would be the biggest and the most important ongoing challenge which any global entrepreneur taking his or her brand global will face. And I think if you can overcome that, I think it's still relatively easier.
Got it. Thank you so much, Bala, for that. Anything that you'd like to add specifically, since you've been with the Amazon Global Selling Program, as to I think you've also kind of address some of the challenges that that Amazon Global Selling can help. But anything that you'd like to add there as to how how Amazon Global Selling has helped, and any advice to for founders to looking at that?
Right, absolutely. So I think they've honestly, I think Amazon Global Selling, I think Vishwadhicha is almost like a partner. So I think her team, we've been working together for many years now. And I think one of the best things about Amazon, of course, especially outside India, is, and I tell this to all my fellow entrepreneurs who reach out, that it's driven a lot by technology, right? So everything on Amazon global platforms, unlike India, which is still maturing as a platform, globally in America, Europe, you will see everything is behind a technology platform. So a lot of that is easy to do, and you can figure out on your own and sort of do your tests, and that's how we've been doing it. But I think there are some of these very strategic things, as a business which is trying to grow year on year very fast, I think which is where Amazon Global Selling team, at least in our journey, has played a very important role. It could be category and market insights, things we should be doing, the way we should approach a certain category, like Vishwadhicha said, right? Like what is working, what's coming up. I think that's super critical. Again, like I said, it's very critical to evolve yourself, as a brand. Apart from that, I think, planning your annual calendar with the Amazon Global Selling team has been also critical for us, right? We have this tradition of doing that every year, because again, it's a foreign market. You don't still entirely understand what are the big events, why is it driven, and why is Halloween so important, or why is the 4th of July so important in America, for example, right? I think that those insights are so critical for you to plan your product calendar, your marketing calendar, your distribution, right? And I think that's where, of course, Amazon plays a role. And of course, last and most importantly is problem solving. So, anywhere you get stuck, I think, you always have somebody to talk to, and they in most cases end up connecting you to the right person or helping you out, which is again something we keep facing on a daily basis, right? So that's one. On your second question about what will be my advice, I think my 2 cents, Dave, again, I think very similar to what Kanwal sir said, is identifying your ticket to win in going global is super critical. I mean, don't go global just for the sake of going global. I think, what's your ticket to win? And it could be anything. It could be the fact that you're taking a unique product which is native to India, right? Like we've, of course, discussed. That's what we did. I mean, that was one of our ticket to win, is at least what we thought when we started off. Secondly, could be, taking a product which is innovative. It's something which is not there in the market, and you're exporting that out of India, right? Second could be your distribution. Third could be your understanding of the problem at hand. But what is that ticket to win? Identify that. And then if you go to the market, I think, because I'm sure all of us want to build long-term businesses. So there, I think, it just ends up being a more sustainable play when you approach it like that. So that would be my advice. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks Bala again for those practical insights. Coming to the same question to you, Ahana, would love to understand some of your pitfall challenges that we can learn from.
Absolutely. I think firstly, I have to say, Bala, what a wonderful story. Just to hear that how people were perceiving India 5 years back and how things have changed. I completely agree. This is new India. And just to add to that, recently, I won't name the brand, but there is a global MNC player based out of course, outside India. They absolutely, they just copied the kind of cookies that we have, the kind of packaging that we have. And I think this just shows that how people were perceiving India is completely changing. And I'm just so glad that, we are so privileged that we have an opportunity to build during such inflection points. So what a wonderful time to be a founder. So I just wanted to add to that. Coming to the pitfall, I would say, of course, there are a lot of learnings on this journey. I think for me, the biggest I would say is having high respect for the consumers. And this might sound very basic, but sometimes I think we dumb down the consumers a lot. And this happens when people are talking to me about pricing. Because for so long, what have we seen in the consumer goods space? All the big companies, it was always about selling the cheapest product. I think that has always been the narrative. And I think now what we have to do is we really need to respect, and I definitely respect Indian consumers a lot. when you talk to a mother, it's not about just the price, it's about the value. And she knows, she understands, agar ye cookie maida se bana hai, the maida ka cost kitna hai, agar cookie nut se banane, if she can see the nuts, she will understand the value. So I think that has been my biggest learning, because sometimes you get a lot of pushback to just focus on pricing and not on the value. And I think as a founder in this new India, especially the consumers, like when you're talking to a mother who's aspiring for the best-in-class product, focus on the value. I think the value communication piece has to be absolutely on point. And I think that has been my biggest learning as I'm now seeing the data, right? As I was mentioning earlier as well, that, for example, Ahmedabad and Baroda are the fastest growing cities for us, and not the Bombay and the Bangalores. So that is number one. And of course, if you see what is happening outside the consumer space, if we just take a step back, this has always been true, right? The one example which everyone will resonate with, let's just say Bollywood. In 90s, it was all about that, it's only the masala movies that are going to sell. But now you see that the content-based movies are doing 100 crores as well. Like Razi is doing 100 crores. Imagine in early 2000, someone would say that, no, I'm going to focus on content. People would have said, no, it's not going to work. So it's high time that you really focus on your brand narrative. You really focus on the value. And I think, of course, understanding the problem that the customer is facing, because if you're truly delivering on that, I think the willingness to pay would be there.
Great. No, Ahana, it kind of reminds me of my first job when I was trying to do my own startup, and then also when I was first working for another startup, trying to sell software in different parts of India, and how we fought hard to kind of have differential pricing, but that actually fired back rather than kind of focusing on the value. But yeah, I think that's a great piece of insight. Very, very hard to implement, but something that as a consumer brand, you have to kind of stick in the longer term. So thanks so much for those insights as well. I'm just going to quickly check if we have any questions from the audience. Others we'll just continue.
So I think there's a question from Tamal. He's asking, how do you take care that quality and product assortment is maintained optimally in D2C brands? I mean, I can answer that. And of course, Bala, yes. You also refer to quality, so would love to hear your perspective as well. So, I'll be very honest, when I was starting, and we're also like a very pretty new age, like just 18, 19 months old brand. When I was thinking about manufacturing, my idea was, what is core to us? A core is marketing, data. We're going to keep it in-house. Operation is not core to us, so we're going to outsource. So that was a mindset I had earlier. And then I visited a lot of contract manufacturing sites, right? And given the scale, we were just starting up. Our volumes were extremely low. So the contract manufacturers who were willing to talk to us were a very small scale. And when I visited their facilities, and especially, the bathrooms, they were completely shabby. And I was very clear from day one that I really wanted to employ women on the shop floor, because, as I said, if we are a purpose-driven brand, we want to make purpose reflect in everything that we do. And I truly believe in making women more financially independent, and that's the true way to empower them. So wanted them as part of this journey. So the quality was so bad, the toilets were so shabby, and I said, oh, guess what, if there is a solution which is not existing outside, let's build it in-house. And that's how we actually took the entire production in-house. We hired women from local communities, because now it helps us in two ways. One, we understand each and everything that can go wrong, right, while making the product, and we have the right control on every quality parameter. And especially, as Bala was also mentioning, that in food, quality is absolutely important, especially the consumers that we are going after, the mothers and the kids, right? You need to ensure that you have best-in-class product. And the second thing I would say that, of course, even from a pricing perspective, we know exactly how much would it take to make this product. So from a quality perspective, to have a stronger control, to have a thorough understanding of manufacturing, we actually started with an in-house model. Bala, anything that you would like to add?
Yeah. No, I think, Anna, I think you covered most of it. I think online, offline, D2C, non-D2C, I think quality, in this space is super critical, I think, Tamal. So I think, and I think very similar story. I think a lot of times we have thought of outsourcing our packaging at different parts of our journey. It definitely adds another layer of complication while you're building a business. But again, for us, it was super critical to do something which was at par global standards, and we could not find anybody, and we said we will do it ourselves. And today, I think I still spend 25% of my time on ensuring, our manufacturing. How are we getting better? We are a BRC certified facility in the NCR region, which is a British Retail Consortium. That's one of the largest and the most toughest safety standards in the world for food. And but I think all those certifications are at one side, and then staying true to yourself. When you're making a product is I think is super critical, right? So I think a lot of those processes we follow, like I said, is something we're not asked to do, but we do it still because we know when ultimately the customer tastes our tea, he or she might feel that difference, and might taste the difference, and it's worked for us till now. So I think quality is paramount and super critical if you're looking at entering a category which is like around food. So
absolutely.
I would just want to add one more point on this quality thing. So what happens is when you're selling on Amazon, there are a lot of other sellers who are selling and can sell similar products and can have an infringement problem there. So to maintain this, what we have is called an Amazon brand registry tool. So what it helps in is if you enroll into it and you can get the trademark in the destination marketplace, what it helps is you can report a violation through this tool, like if there is any other seller infringing upon your brand, and then what our entire team does is work on those and remove it. And in fact, if you're a part of the automated brand protection part of the Amazon brand registry tool, our search engines do this automatically, even before actually somebody infringes upon your products and listings. What we provide is the protection so that through our ML logic, we will identify it proactively, and these sellers will not be able to infringe upon your brand. So that's a little bit about the brand protection part that I wanted to talk about it from an Amazon standpoint, how to maintain your quality there.
Got it. There's a question here from Mitanshi who's asking about handicrafts, especially packaging and transportation. Not sure if Kanwal, if you've looked at brands there, any inputs, or Biswajita?
I think, Biswajita, you may have more experience. We have seen a few, but not really seen anything very high scale. So I would prefer to Biswajita on that.
Sure. So in handicraft category, so earlier we had some very big players in the handicrafts category. And so we see a big demand for wooden handicraft or those authentic Indian handicraft products. A couple of times the logistics and the maintenance of so many SKUs. So what happens is in handicraft, it's almost like you have so many millions of SKUs, and choosing the right channel of fulfillment, whether it's through FBA or through MFN, that becomes important. And it also, like out of your, say, millions of SKUs, there'll be very few where you can really invest to make it visible for your customers and make that sell. Hence, it's slightly, and then becomes, there's a long tail of SKUs, and say that it doesn't sell, the entire liquidation part and reverse logistics part becomes slightly tighter there. However, as I said, there is a demand there, and our teams can definitely help you come up with the right export strategy depending on the marketplace, what sells, and what should be the fulfillment channel, and how should you operate so that you don't get into those traps anymore. So please feel free to, I also saw that we had posted our Amazon BPT kind of link or the email ID. Please feel free to write to us, and we'll help you with the right contacts and how to get started. Thank you.
Got it. Yeah, I think there's another interesting question around someone who's developed like a virus, antivirus nano material. So it looks like it's an innovative product that again we can take offline and see how we can help there. There's another question around food regulations. I think Bala, you touched upon it, as well as Ahana. So the question is specifically when taking food brands to the US, what are the challenges you faced in following those regulations?
Got it. No, so I think Dave, like I mentioned, right? I think for every category, depending on what you're selling, right? Tea, coffee, spices, food, herbal supplements, nutrition, there are certain guidelines which is governed, under which you need to, you need to export. And of course, while you do, you are bound to sort of manufacture the product in a certain HACCP certified plant in India. FDA can anytime do an audit. They generally don't do it in the early months of your business, but when you start getting scale, you'll get flagged off, and FDA will do a local audit in India. So bunch of those things. Labeling is super critical. I think you need to follow labeling for each market, right? I mean, we have separate labeling for the US, for Europe, UAE, right? That's again, in India, of course. So labeling is another area you need to really look at. And thirdly is also the kind of ingredients you use, right? A lot of ingredients are not allowed in several markets, right? For example, an ashwagandha might not be allowed in a few countries in Europe, for example, right? So you need to also look at what are the ingredients which are allowed, not allowed in a certain market. There are a bunch of disclaimers you need to make, right? So when you're selling, for example, nuts in the US, right, there is a bunch of disclaimers you need to make on your product. So I think it's a long list, but fortunately, if you end up researching on the FDA website, it's pretty transparent, and you can start off, and then of course keep evolving as a business, as a manufacturing unit as you grow.
Got it. Awesome. Ahana, anything you'd like to add there?
No, I think Bala covered it beautifully.
Got it. Great. Kanwal, there's a question for you for a startup who's doing online interiors and architecture design. And what's your advice for someone in this category on going global?
So I think the answer is very much similar to any other consumer product business. What is it that differentiates you? And why would you succeed when there are hundreds of solutions available in those markets? So, you cannot use cost arbitrage beyond a point. So, because you're talking of design, you're talking aesthetics, my personal kind of quick response would be understanding the local cultural context for this particular business may be even more complex, because you need to understand the kind of colors, the kind of, design aesthetics, the kind of functional uses that consumers are looking for. So certainly, there is a huge amount of talent which is available in India. In fact, we have a company called Design Cafe which does interiors, but in the Indian context. So we know that there is some really high quality and high class product and service that is available. But I would again go very, very careful, choose a market, go very deep in understanding what is the gap there? Or is there a gap there? And if you find that there is a gap where you can provide, as Ahana said, value and not just a price discount, then I think that's the point of start. But honestly, it'll be a much tougher journey as my first reaction than even selling some of the FMCG or CPG products. The context.
Got it. Great, thank you. I think there's one more related question, but I guess maybe I can pose that to Kanwal as well, in terms of the investment that is required, and how do you kind of do a financial modeling, or maybe you could turn that question into maybe what are the 3-4 interesting categories that you are looking to invest in, would maybe a good interesting takeaway for the audience.
Sure. So I think the broad brush area that we are very excited about, and I would say both Vahdam and Open Secret fall into that, is now emerging as a mega theme of wellness. And wellness, you can articulate that in what you eat, in what you put on your body, in how you manage your lifestyle, in how you live your life almost. So wellness is one area that we have been focused on pretty much across the spectrum of what all it entails. Over and above that, healthier consumptions is always been a universal theme. It's just that the opportunity to build those kind of brands has become much more feasible today because of the infrastructure points that we talked about earlier. It's not that companies didn't realize that you could build healthier products, but the fact that you combine health and taste, there is a certain price and a certain value proposition, and there is a certain amount of infrastructural requirements, because these are not things that you can go and sell in very small mom and pop stores. So I think that the timing is also really been very effective. And there are several other themes that I can keep going on. I think on the modeling and the way you are evaluating your business, personally, we have always believed that the most critical, lever of success is fundamentally the gross margin of the business. Mm-hmm. Because if your, cost of goods and your selling price, you can create enough value addition. And Bala mentioned that point. I mean, again, pardon me, Bala, for saying this, but Badam tea has a 80% gross margin. So that gives you the leeway to then manage everything else under that. So whether it's your logistics cost, whether it's your marketing expense, a lot of people say marketing is very expensive, Facebook is becoming more expensive and so on. But if you can manage your overall unit economics in such a way that you can deliver the right gross margin, and that goes back to the point that Ahana was making about value and not just the price. So I would highly encourage entrepreneurs not to say, let's start with a 10% margin and over time with synergies and with economies of scale, it will automatically go to 30, 40, 50%. I think you have to design your business, you have to almost design your business model to start with the right margin structure. And if you cannot justify that margin structure, then I would say there is something wrong in the proposition, and don't go down that path of saying we will fix it over time. So that would be one critical aspect. Second is model for investments in a lot of learning. Again, I think Anna made that point about data, data being the new oil, whatever the metaphors are being used. And again, Jita talked about that, is learn every day from even small experiments that you're doing. Because we fundamentally believe, and again, Bala can probably share a story of how little money you need to actually learn what those building blocks of success are. So this whole belief system or the myth that you need to raise billions of dollars to build even the foundation of a business, we don't agree at all. I think we have almost 29 brands now, and the same model we have seen across brand, that you need to invest in insights, you need to invest in learnings, and not necessarily start chasing scale till you get those building blocks in place. So to that extent, I would say, there is huge amount of opportunity today with platforms like Amazon, where there's a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of rating and reviews, not only for your brand, but for competitive brands. So, all of us who grew up in the levers type of system, we would do extensive research in the market. Now, the research is on your screen. So, understanding individually, what consumers are saying for a particular product and how I can leverage that. I mean, the most exciting story that the boat founders will tell you is they started their business 5 years ago selling what they call indestructible charging cables. Because the biggest complaint they found on Amazon reviews was that people would say my charging cable breaks very easily. So they went and coated Kevlar on the cables and that became a hit. Now, this is not something which is rocket science. It came out of just that, desire to understand the consumer. So there are several things that can be done today. And till you reach a point where you really believe that you have figured out what those building blocks are. And then I'm saying is really when the investment for growth becomes logical. And that's where investors like us also like to come in, because, we want to see some, insight, some building blocks on the ground. And it's a virtuous cycle for everyone.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for that comprehensive answer. Hopefully we answered that some of the large categories you're looking at, wellness as a theme, how do you iterate fast, and obviously looking at kind of your profit margin and unit economics from day one. So thank you so much for that. There's another interesting related question that's coming up, maybe for both Bala and Ahana. How do you innovate on products, especially when majority of your customers may come from third-party sellers like Amazon? So I don't know what percentage of the business comes from marketplaces, but so that's the question on innovation, and how do you stay, I guess, close to your customers and get access to that data?
Sure. I mean, I can take it, and then Bala, you can add. So as I said, I'm not going to take any credit on the innovation that we have done. It's all driven by what the mothers are looking for, and I'll tell you how the innovation pipeline also came about. When I was working with General Mills, a lot of mothers said that I just I think I asked them, why do you think all the cookies are junk? And they said, I don't like the maida. So that's what we did. We just unjunked it. We removed all the maida and added 40 to 50% nuts. And then the mother came to us and said, we love your cookies, but we want something in savory. That's why Nutty Chips were born. Then she said, all these health drinks, they have 70% refined sugar. Can you just unjunk it? So the entire unjunking story has just been by hearing what she's asking. So it's not only about what to remove, but also what to innovate in the future. In fact, we're doing a new product launch hopefully next couple of weeks. And again, this idea came when I was doing a webinar with mothers, and she was like, can you just do that? And I thought it's a big market. And I think that's the principle that we use. Is the couple of things, that you need to ensure that ties to your brand is it synergistic with your positioning. So, if there are a lot of ideas also coming, is it going to strengthen our positioning as unjunking snacking? So of course, does it help there? Second, of course, from a back end, from a manufacturing perspective, are there synergies as well? And if these three trifecta works, customer problem, unjunking snacking, strengthening, and the third thing is back-end synergy, and you have to cover it with a deep market. I think one thing we are very, very focused when we are thinking about innovation in Open Secret is we are not habit builders. And I truly believe when it comes to food, people love their local food, right? We are not here to change or to tell you what you eat. You want to eat your amazing cookie, we're going to remove the maida, we'll give you a better for you cookie. So I think that's extremely important. That is it a deep category that we really want to disrupt? So that is definitely the overall decision-making criteria that we use for innovation.
Got it.
Yeah, I'll just, I think they've add to that. I think for us, I think innovation, one thing I've come to realize is, a lot of times we try to complicate innovation quite a bit, right? I think, our sense has always been that, innovation does not need to be earth shattering, right? It can be something which you just take out of common sense and sort of execute on that. I think Kanwal sir gave a phenomenal example on that page, at a brand like Boat, doing what they did with that, right? That was just innovating out of common sense. That is also innovation. If you're building a consumer brand, you're not a tech entrepreneur. So, you need to really look at signals around you and then execute and do small innovations and then, scale them up, right? To give you a few examples from our side, all our loose leaf teas are vacuum packed, right, for the end consumer. And we just like Lipton's oldest campaign has been about the freshness of tea, and we said, how can we keep the tea fresh? And the best way to keep tea fresh was vacuum packaging it, right? And I remember getting a 50,000 rupees machine 5 years back, and we were vacuum packaging our teas, right? So now we did not innovate or create the technology of vacuum packaging, but today we've been doing it at scale, and that's been one of the reasons why consumers recall us. The early consumers who have our loose leaf teas, still stick with the brand, right? So for me, I think innovation is taking from common sense. I think a bunch of other things is, just listening to your consumers, finding those signals, looking at trends. It's a mix of some of these things, right? Looking at trends, looking at what's happening in the market, keeping an open mind. And lastly, I think sometimes also your gut feeling, right? So, again, one example, I remember we had hired this agency to, do some, first time we had some money to, get an agency and all of that, to do some customer research and tell us what should we launch. I obviously had an idea, but we wanted them to do some work, and they said that, they told us, you do not launch this turmeric first range of herbal teas, right? But we then went against all those presentations, beautiful presentations they had made, and ended up launching 4-5 variants. And that's been, those organic turmeric teas have been a defining product for us as a brand, right? More than revenue, it's been a defining product for us as a brand. So I think gut feeling also is critical. And, again, like Kanwal sir mentioned, in our space, you can experiment and innovate at a very small cost also. So, do some of that. And even if it does not work out, just put that cost as a cost of learning, right? So I think that's at least how, I think about innovation in this space.
I think one thing which I would add, given that the audience is a lot of founders, when we think about innovation in consumer goods space, we limit our thinking to product. And I think Bala and I, we discuss about product, but what I would encourage everyone also is innovation will reflect in your go-to-market strategy as well. The way playbooks are changing, as Kamal was mentioning, right? Earlier, it was very simple. You run an ad on TV, you have a distribution to like 10 lakh stores and you are done. But now innovation reflects in how you're going to offline as well. To give an example, like majority of our offline sales are coming from cities where we have zero sales force. And how it's happening, the retailers are calling us and everything like the fishing and farming is happening online. That is innovation. They are paying us upfront. If you think what is the biggest problem in offline is credit, how will you collect? Here they're paying you in advance. That is innovation. So the only thing is just broaden the definition of innovation. It will reflect in everything that you do.
Great thoughts. How do you actually, I think similar thoughts that both of you shared, and how do you actually extend that to GTM as well as an innovation? So I think we're pretty much coming to time, that we may just have time for one last question, which I can look up, and maybe just to extend the similar question, there is how do you kind of adopt and what do you do to kind of get people to adopt a new product? I'm sure we've kind of answered that already, but maybe we'll just open it up that as a last question. The question is really, how do you get people to adopt to a new product in the F&B category? For a comparatively new category is the question, as a last one. And maybe Ahana, you can take a stab at that.
Sure. I think, again, let us take a step back. What is a brand? A brand is a promise to a customer that this is what we do. And I generally call it, and this is how I explain it to my team, which is job to be done, right? And if you own that job to be done, and a lot of people are asking me, oh my God, you are present in so many categories. Is it a distraction? And I say, you're wearing maybe a key account manager hat. If you wear a consumer hat, what is a job to be done? It's 6 p.m. Sometimes I want to eat a cookie. Sometimes I want to eat savory. Sometimes I just want to eat some nuts. With different categories, what we are doing is we're unjunking that 6 p.m. moment. So when you're thinking about adapting a product, always think about the promise or the job to be done of that product. And if you feel that it's truly delivering on that promise and job to be done, people will automatically fall in love, and they will hopefully become a habit.
Got it. Any last thoughts, Kanwal, Bala, Biswajita, before we end our session today?
So I think a couple of slightly orthogonal ones. I mean, one, to complete the first question, I think one of the most interesting development that is happening in the market today is the opportunity to be able to actually sample your products, get actual trials. So I totally agree with Ahana that eventually it's the brand, it's the narrative, it's the story behind the brand which consumers will adopt as a part of the overall experience. But certainly, I believe that like in our days at Unilever, and I'm sure at Procter as well, trial generation was the holy grail for any category of products, and food particularly, because food is a very difficult category in terms of change of habit. We talked about that earlier. But today, you have platforms which are allowing you to sample, which are allowing you to get feedback, which are allowing you to actually get the loop accomplished. And that is, to me, another very positive ecosystem development, which is helping a lot of brands. Certainly in India, I don't know the global, but we have those sample boxes kind of categories. What I wanted to touch upon a little bit, which we didn't specifically talk about, but it's something which I am a big believer in, and I think everybody on the panel is actually doing their bit in that, is our commitment to not just building great brand, not just offering great products and stories, but also being conscious of the bigger good, or the value of good. And again, Ahana talked extensively about it. Bala, on his behalf, I can tell you the amount of work they're doing with the children of tea pickers in the garden, and so on and so forth. Packaging innovation, how do you, be more environment friendly, single-use plastic utilization. So I feel that, the brand is now becoming so much bigger than just a great product with a great product story wrapped into the brand. It is the story of the entrepreneur. It is the backstory of why you started the business. And these are some of the almost narratives which a large brand, a large multinational cannot take away from you. Because the soul of the brand, the soul of the product or what you're offering is almost unique to an entrepreneurial ecosystem, because by definition, a large company, you cannot claim that there is somebody behind this. Of course, Sir Thomas Lipton started Lipton, that was 100 years ago, and you cannot suddenly, say that the soul of Lipton is because the gentleman did something 100 years ago. So I would encourage, the entrepreneurs to also not just as a brand story and a brand narrative, but to also think about this whole broader construct of ESG, which covers everything that we have talked about, whether it's women empowerment, whether it's being fair to the environment, and so on and so forth. It almost is becoming table stakes today for consumers, both in India and anywhere else in the world, where they want to know what is the purpose, as Ahana called it, what is the philosophy, what is the value that you are delivering over and beyond just giving me a great product at a great price. So just wanted to bring in this slightly orthogonal point, because personally, me and at Fireside, we believe that there is a bigger purpose to even what we do beyond just being an investor.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'll just quickly open it up to Bala and Biswajita, and then we'll end our session.
No, I think nothing else, Dave, from my side. I think great time to go global. So, do it now. You've got the ecosystem right in front of you. So, go and sell on Amazon, try and take some money from Kaval sir and get featured on your story, right? So I think that's all you need to do, right? So go ahead and do it immediately. So no better time.
Wonderful. Biswajita, anything from you?
Sure. So I'll just answer the previous one also. How do you increase, how do you make people adapt to your own products? So there are a couple of sampling processes. We used to call it subscription box. A couple of new things are developing right now from an Amazon tool perspective. The other tool is the wine reviews. Enroll for that wine review program, because online, if you see a lot of people try to adapt once they look at the reviews and the ratings, and once they see good reviews, they start adapting or adopting into that product. So that's also very critical to build an unbiased set of really good reviews. So we have a program called Wine, where you enroll and you send your samples to the experts. They sample your product and they send out an unbiased review. So these are a couple of tactical aspects that I first wanted to touch upon before sharing my final thoughts. And the final thought is obviously, we have tried to definitely enable a lot of things so that when you start up, and versus Bala, we would make it slightly more easier for Ahana maybe when she is trying to start up now. So we are trying to definitely learn, whether it's giving, even for tier 2, tier 3 cities, we have now tried to give this entire vernacular language program kind of a aspect, wherein when you get to talk to customer or the seller support teams, you can talk to them in Tamil, or you can talk to them in Hindi. So there are a lot of innovation and things that we continue to develop, and so that we can really help brands to really go global. So if there is anything, please reach out to us and feel free to, I think Akshat has already shared the mail ID. So feel free to ask about any questions, and I'm sure we couldn't do justice to all the questions. There are a couple of other questions which we couldn't answer. If you have specific questions for the Amazon Brand Global Selling Program, please do write to us, and we'll be happy to take it offline. So that's all, Dave. It was really indeed a great pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thank you, and thank you, Kanwal, Ahana, Bala, for your partnership, and Biswajita for your time as well. I know we may not have been able to answer that, but I just wanted to end it on that note. Like Bala said, I think the time is now for Indian brands to think to go global, and hopefully I truly enjoyed the insights that all of you shared, and hopefully I'm sure it was a great one for our audience as well. Thank you so much, and look forward to staying in touch.